What's good, family? Welcome back to the Expression of Love podcast. Welcome back to Become Your Own Breakthrough. I am so happy that you are still rocking out with me here on the podcast. It is your host, Soul Expression indeed. I have something to say. I've had a few conversations over the last couple months that have really opened my eyes to something important. Something important about our tendency towards tribalism. Our tendency towards, I'm in the cool group and anyone who's not in the cool group is my enemy. A tendency toward hatred. And it's not just hatred, it's not regular hatred, like I choose to hate you or I was taught to hate you because of the way you look or the way you dress or the way that you, I don't know, it's not that kind of hate. It's more so a much deeper hatred that when you peel back the layers of it, it's just hatred of one's self. That's right. It's hatred of one's own capacity for violence. It's hatred of one's own capacity for being dishonest. It's hatred for one's own lack of integrity. It's hatred for one's own inner lust or some sort of impulse that is not conducive for a peaceful society. When you peel back the layers on this tendency toward hatred that I'm talking about, you find underneath it that it's really directed towards oneself, even though the way that it's carried out seems like it targets other people and it others people. And there are some very prominent, very loud examples of this tendency towards hatred that I'd like to point out. But first, I want to let you know that no one who I'm going to talk about in this video is someone who I think should be dehumanized or labeled in some way that makes them seem like a bad person. So, let's dive in, shall we? Dave Chappelle, my favorite comedian. Around the time of the George Floyd murder, called Candace Owens a rotten bitch and the most articulate idiot that he's ever seen in his life.
Candace Owens, that rotten bitch. She's the most articulate idiot I've ever seen in my fucking life.
Olivia Wilde made a movie and called out Jordan Peterson, called him a pseudo-intellectual hero to the incel community. The left often calls former President Trump a racist, compares him to a Nazi, and former Vice President Biden names so-called MAGA Republicans extremists that threaten the foundation of our republic. This pattern reminds me of something. It's very similar to the tactics used in religious wars. They would dehumanize as a means to convince their own soldiers and their own civilians that by going to war, they were doing God's work, even when that meant going somewhere and murdering innocent women and children brutally and mercilessly, sometimes to eliminate entire peoples from the face of the earth. It reminds me of the use of the word savage to characterize indigenous peoples occupying land desired by Christian nations of Europe. It reminds me of the dehumanization of the Jewish people used by Hitler. And besides all of the death and destruction that these tactics bring and have brought to the world, I want you to know what all the people that use these tactics have in common: ignorance. The postmodern socialists are ignorant of human nature and the progress that the free market has brought to the world they live in and that they take for granted. So they dehumanize capitalists. Postmodern feminists are ignorant of the positive contributions of masculine, manly men and the negative effects of broken families and hypersexuality. So they dehumanize masculine men and children. Classical liberals are ignorant of the danger of their own refusal to challenge the leftists. So they allow the dehumanization of our founding fathers. This is obviously just to name a few examples. There are many more, unfortunately. The uneducated dehumanize the educated because they don't have the mental equipment to actually challenge the facts. The woke mob believes that when you fat shame, you are causing harm because that makes people want to kill themselves. This is really being said and spread throughout our nation and the world. They believe this as if there isn't any way to talk about health and the dangers of obesity to people who are obese without these people contemplating suicide. So when you set out to talk about health, addressing obesity, especially doing so to people who are currently obese, you are labeled a fat shamer. In other words, you are labeled subhuman or something less than a decent human being. Obviously, the same line of ignorance goes for slut shamers, so-called transphobes and homophobes, the religious person, the overzealous religious person, and the straight white male, the rich straight white male, who is the main target of the woke mob most of the time. How do we know it's ignorance? Easy. The arguments made never refute the idea that they disagree with. What tends to happen is they always only label the person or group something negative. The leftist screams, "You're one of them," instead of saying, "This is the evidence that I have to support my argument," because they have absolutely no argument. Someone in my own family demonstrated this perfectly. She made a comment about rising gas prices, and I made a comment blaming former Vice President Joe Biden. She then said, well, he didn't cause it and he can't do anything about it. It was the lockdown and COVID and people asking for new jobs, whatever that means. So I replied, okay, then it was his lack of action that worsened all of the other factors. And she stopped. She stopped what she was doing. She got my attention, made sure I was looking at her, scrunched up her face, looking very confused, and asked, "Are you a Republican?" Immediately going toward a group identity that she can label me as. I said, "No, I'm a conservative." Then she scrunched up her face even more and asked why I'm a conservative, to which I replied that I just don't align with leftist values. And so she says, "Well, what values do you not align with that are on the left?" And I began to answer this question with things like the attack on free speech, the segregation on college campuses, some of the policies that you see being passed, the anti-men movement. But before I really could give a full answer to this question, I was cut off by her asking if I don't see any of that on the right. Once again, I started to answer this question, but I was cut off again, this time at the very beginning of my sentence. All she needed was a tone of voice that was not in agreement. So she stopped me and said, "Oh, well, okay. I was only asking because I'm adding to the list of things I'll never talk to you about. A negative judgment of my character based on a foundation of lies about a group called conservatives that she would never even talk to." I thought this was a perfect illustration of the disease of ignorance that grips the very soul of leftists. And the most mysterious part of it all is that when you talk to them, you can tell on the inside, a lot of them, they mean you no harm. They're just in a mental cage of closed-mindedness and defensiveness that they can't seem to break out of. But meaning no harm in the collective as opposed to in the individual means nothing. Good intentions mean nothing. And good intentions mixed with ignorance means war. But what can we do with this? How do you combat against ignorance of this degree? Is there any hope? And if so, what should we equip ourselves with in this fight? One word: fearlessness. We have to cultivate fearlessness, and it is never easy to do so, but we must. We must cultivate fearlessness in the face of being name-called and labeled. Fearlessly teach our children the truth and discipline them to not follow the crowd. We must be fearless when facing joblessness, isolation, or even attacks. Now, don't get caught up arguing with leftists in the comment section of social media. Simply defend the truth in your own home, at your child's school, and in your own workplace. Focus on raising a generation of truth seekers, researchers, strong masculine men, strong feminine women. Be accountable for your own ignorance and fearlessly seek out the truth for yourself. Fearlessness is what we need today. It is time to take your life back and become your own breakthrough. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Comment down below if you have something to support or something to argue with. I cannot wait to talk with you. and see what you have to say in the comment section. It is your host, Soul Expression of the Expression of Love podcast. This has been episode 4 of Become Your Own Breakthrough. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.
Expressions of